I think it's fair to say that the anticipation of a new console generation has lost its sheen over the years. What once used to be a time of excitement and wonder at what a new era was to bring, speculation of the new technology and what it was capable of introducing and expanding with regards to new game releases. So many people would be able to tell you about that mind-blowing feeling they had seeing PS2 Solid Snake for the first time. Personally, as a too young South African without internet connection, I will say I didn't get that experience, but I was there for the hype around the coming of the HD era. Being present for the first hysteria about a Final Fantasy VII remake after Square Enix showed off the tech demo for the PS3, with honestly pretty poorly mixed audio. But now, all that excitement is generally replaced with a predominant miasma. Questions of how much is it going to cost? Do you actually have games for this thing? Is there actually any noticeable improvement that justifies forking out all my money for a new box? All very valid questions and concerns, which are obviously compounded by the current economic conditions where not only are games and their related paraphernalia exorbitantly expensive, but the general cost of living and low wages making the purchase of these products even more exclusionary. But before being accused of being too political for speaking of the socio-economic factors which have had increasing impacts upon the development, interaction, and consumption with all of our hobbies, I will focus on that last point, as I do think it is probably the biggest reason for this increased circumspection. Increasingly, new games don't show notable changes which actually give a feeling that progress is being made. The ever-diminishing returns of the graphical arms race really does lay bare the lack of innovation or new ideas for ways to actually create new gaming experiences. Compounded by two other factors. Firstly, the homogenization of gameplay mechanics, as games are placed under severe constraints and requirements to satisfy budgets and shareholder expectations. And so, because of that, they are developed with similar controls and mechanics that have been associated with successful sales. And the other is the lack of new IP. A significant portion of releases are now remakes/reboots or continuations of existing franchises. Maybe not always a direct sequel, but part of an existing franchise. And so, it is even more noticeable when a new release shows a lack of innovation or even has features removed. Now, let me say in response to the idea that I'm being a bit too nostalgia blinded, this has been a problem in the past. The HD era can particularly be pointed to as having games which focused on pretty skyboxes over having anything supremely new or boundary pushing. And it was also very much the start of, now that we've killed backwards compatibility, we can release all our old games but with better graphics. And even the highly beloved 6th generation of consoles weren't free of this problem. I mean, as brilliant as it was, you could make the argument that Final Fantasy X did actually cut features that were present in previous games. Most notably, the lack of the open world to fly about in. But you could also argue, as I would, that it has other changes and features which do mitigate these exclusions. I think my own personal most egregious iteration in this era was for Harvest Moon. I absolutely loved Friends of Mineral Town on the Game Boy Advance, which has a great remake for modern systems, by the way. Unless you don't like the new art style, I can't really think of a reason why someone who loved the original wouldn't like the remake. Anyway, I played so much of it that when I finally got around to playing A Wonderful Life, the disappointment was immense. I could not believe how limited it was in comparison to the game on a handheld system. But I think that's enough rambling preamble to serve as an intro. And on the topic of lacking some features but supplementing the change, let's get on to what I actually really want to talk about. Released in 2002, Wild Arms 3 is the third installment in Sony's now disgustingly abandoned JRPG series and the series' debut on the PS2. And it is a great example of doing what existing franchises should do when you are moving to a new console generation. Using the new technology to create the grandest experience yet, while still maintaining the identity you have established before. It does take out some stuff, which I will address, but it adds way more to compensate. So, let's get on to the first point. We're going to start here mostly due to the fact that there hasn't been such a great amount that has changed. There are definitely notable differences, but it is predominantly an amalgamation of the combat mechanics found in the first two games, which requires me to make the disclaimer that I am not going to talk about the series' core combat here. I do have 2 videos where I've spoken about it before. However, I will highlight certain aspects when they are clearly changed in this one. Anyway, let's begin with the first clear change, and that is now that everybody uses arms. Rather than it only being one character, as was in the first game, or your more military-aligned characters in the second, now it's everyone. Be they bounty hunter, treasure hunter, previously sheltered civilian, or even shaman. And we will get onto plot and theme differences later obviously, but I do like how already this showcases the different vibe of Fulgaia that is present in the third game. In the first game, arms are banned and considered evil to the point that Rudy is banished from a village for having one. In the second, they are more prevalent, but still mostly for the use of established institutions and organizations. Meanwhile, the third game is going more for that free roaming outlaw world, and so arms are a frequent occurrence, used by a lot of people. But how does this actually impact gameplay? I mean, does it actually create a different gameplay dynamic, other than when I push the kill enemy button, my priest character fires a gun, rather than twat it with a stick? Well, yes. Most notably is that arms no longer require maintenance of ammo between battles. Series veterans will know that in the first 2 games, even the characters with arms did not use them as part of their standard attack. Instead, they would have the aim command, which allowed you to use your available arsenal to attack with them for different effects. And each use would use up ammo that would need to be reloaded by either using a bullet clip or by paying for it at the store. That is no longer a feature. Each character has an ammo count that can be seen on the bottom left of the screen during combat. Every time you do a standard attack, you use up one of those bullets until you will be forced to start using melee. However, you can reload your weapon by defending for a turn. And while I don't think it's necessarily better than how it was done before, it is a fun little switch up, which does have a bit of strategy to it in terms of you deciding when you should reload or not. It also impacts the arms upgrading, because now you make the choice of having more bullets so you can keep spamming attack and then maybe increasing the chance of critical hits, or do you just go for damage, but having to reload like every 2 turns? And arms upgrading is very important since it's the only way to improve standard attack outside of leveling, because in this one you don't get new weapons. So a neat little change up there. Onto a feature which I will concede is done a little bit worse in this game, and that is the force points. Though it's not actually how the points themselves are handled, because I actually do like that part, it's more how you actually use them. So, the handling of the points is a continuation of the second game's approach. In the first game, you needed a certain amount of force points to do special abilities, and using those abilities would then use up the points. Meanwhile, spells were tied to mana as a completely different value. These points would be gained by doing actions, attacking, being attacked, dodging, etc. In the second game, the mana was removed and also tied to force points, with you only needing to have enough of the required points to cast the spell, with that casting not subtracting from the force points, but also not being able to be used to accumulate them. And Wild Arms 3 is keeping up with that change, but with a slight little tweak that I do really like. And that is your base force points. In Wild Arms 2, it was generally below your first force level, with you being able to spend skill points to be able to increase their starting value. In 3, it's completely tied to character level. A level 60 character will start the battle with 60 force points, which is a great encouragement to put the effort into doing some grinding and leveling up. But as I said, the issue comes in with regards to how those force points are spent. There feels like very little variety in how you are going to use them. So I suppose you could argue this is one area where content did actually get taken out, as now everyone only has 3 force abilities rather than the 4 of the previous games. And not only that, but now everyone only has 1 unique ability, while the other 2 are common amongst the entire party. They also don't need to be unlocked through story progression or side content. Now, this could all be fine if you did something interesting with them. But the issue is, they don't really. Now that's a key point. They don't really. Because I did actually use the other 2 a fair bit. It's actually each character's unique ability that is the problem. Series veterans will recognize them from the previous games, which again isn't the core problem. Virginia has Mystic, which can be used on an item to unleash a specific attack, like extending the healing of berries to the whole party, or doing elemental damage with gems. Now, this is one I did use quite a lot. The first thing you should always do in boss battles is Mystic a lucky card, so that everyone gets 2 times XP gain for the fight, which will help you level up very nicely. It's also a far more reliable way of healing the whole party than relying on healing spells. Onto Clive, who has Lock On, one of the more useless abilities. As you can probably guess, it ensures your attack always hits, and it also boosts its damage slightly. When this is introduced in his prologue, you assume it's going to be used quite a bit, since the boss in the fight dodges like every attack. But later, I basically never found an enemy where I needed to use it, especially with you later being able to upgrade your arm to increase its hit chance, or you just have spells available that always hit. The next one, I probably used even less. Jet's Accelerator. It ensures that he will always go first, which could obviously be useful for if you need to quickly get out an attack that will neutralize an enemy in some way, or if you desperately need to heal before the enemy attacks again. The problem is though, I never needed to use it really. both Jet and Virginia are really fast anyway, so they were pretty much always going first in every battle. Lastly, Gallows' ability, which I did use a fair bit as well, Extension. It extends a cast spell onto every available target. So that's pretty good for either buffing the entire party's stats, healing everyone, or hitting a group of enemies weak to a specific element. On a quick side note, with regards to buffing stats, it actually does make a pretty noticeable difference in this game. One attack or defense boost, or evasion or speed increase is genuinely noticeable. Anyway, yes, the unique force abilities are quite a mixed bag, but the other two are definitely better. First, or second I suppose, we have Gatling, which is basically a combo attack. Using it chains multiple attacks together, with the higher you have built your force level, meaning the more attacks you get off. So, if you get it to 100, you unleash quite a barrage. Just remember to reload before doing it, unless you want to change the game from wild arms to wild fists. You can also make it more effective by upgrading the weight attribute of your arm and so getting off more shots. Something which neither the game or manual tells you, by the way. I had to look it up. And lastly, we have the good old summon. And it's probably the most useful the Guardians have ever been, and the most interestingly implemented. The plot is strongly centered around them, and a very good job is done to showcase that through gameplay. Firstly, just their use as a force ability. You use it, and your monsty friend comes and goes boom, but now you have a bit more control over the strength of the attack. The higher your force level, the more damage the attack does. By the way, do you see how this is making the level 1 force ability even less desirable to use, since both of the others encourage you to build up as many force points as possible? And so why would you want to waste them on the not so useful ones? I will say though, the summon attacks are a bit all or nothing. In a Final Fantasy, for example, because of course, as an absolute tourist, that's the only JRPG series I've played, a summon attack can be generally relied on to do decent damage, unless the enemy absorbs the element of the attack. Yeah, if the enemy has any resistance to it, the attack is basically rendered useless. But when they are effective, they can be very effective. And you're encouraged to use them, but while also not being able to spam them endlessly. Each character has a material count, MTC, and every time you summon, you use up one of them, which doesn't restore until you rest. So there's obviously the limit there. But you can also increase this by finding growth eggs, but more notably, it'll also just have a chance of increasing if you summon enough. So it's a good dichotomy. But honestly, their direct use in battle isn't actually where the Guardians shine in this installment. Rather, it's their use as a support. Just as with the previous entries, in order to be able to summon a Guardian, you need to have their medium. And also, like previously, equipping them does raise some base stats. But now, they are also the platform for using the personal skills which were introduced in the second game. Each level gives you a personal skill point, which can then be assigned to one of the skills that is made available by the medium itself, with you being able to reassign them as you please. But you're not just reliant on what the mediums give you. you will find items which you can equip to the medium, which unlock additional skills you can allocate skill points to. And these skills make a big difference. You can increase resistance to certain elements, with full allocation making the attack do nothing. You can increase the amount of force points obtained with each action, you can give your character the chance to counterattack, you can get them to defend other characters, parry, a great one which gives a chance of the character automatically reloading once their clip is empty,
there's more.
One that increases the healing power of berries, as well as status resistances.
There's still more.
And that status effect one is important, because this game loves status effects. There are entire boss fights based around status effects, but not only that, there are so many incidental encounters with enemies who also have them. Which will bring me back to something I spoke about in the first video, I think. How much I love that this series actually encourages you to use status effect healing items, especially given that it still does status effects that stay off the battle at a time when the more prestige JRPG series had dropped that. But back to the mediums. What I really like is that when it comes to that skill point reallocation, is you can actually do it in battle, even being able to swap mediums between characters. So you can tailor your setup on the fly and not be screwed over by a fight just because you weren't aware that this battle needed you to have more potassium or something. And as I said, all these skills are tied to the medium itself. So like in Final Fantasy VII, you can transfer between characters as needed. And another fun reason to use these personal skills is for leveling up. For every skill that you trigger in combat, you will add to a multiplier, which will multiply how much XP is gained for the character at the end of the fight. The mediums also have an effect similar to the espers in Final Fantasy VI. There is no longer a dedicated spellcasting class. Instead, each medium carries specific arcana, as they are called in this game, which allows the holder to cast them when equipped. And I think on the whole, there is probably less magic than previously, but I would say it's more streamlining than just skimping on quality. Most of the magic removed are the higher level versions of previous spells. As in, there is no flame and high flame anymore, there is just one spell per element, and its strength is dictated by the caster's stats. But there's definitely more than enough, and some really fun ones, like Valiant, that increases the character's attack the greater the difference between their max health and their current health. Or the spell that lets you just assign additional elemental weaknesses to an enemy. So it is great to see something which the plot keeps stressing as so important actually having a large impact on the gameplay mechanics. And what's also pretty cool is that when you get the legendary guardians, they allow you to improve the strength of your other mediums. But it is also a bit annoying that as part of the plot, you do have to get all the legendary mediums. So you aren't really given an extra reward for going out of your way to just explore out of your own volition. But there is some mitigation to that we will talk about in another section. Let's finish off by listing a few other alterations that I like. Firstly, vitality. In Wild Arms 2, they introduced the red gems that you can find in dungeons which restore health. These are still present in 3, but they work a bit differently now. Instead of giving health back directly, each character now has a vitality bar. And what this does is after battle, you will use up vitality to restore lost health back to max until the bar is drained. And then obviously you will not restore health anymore. It will even revive a character who is dead, but with the drawback that they will have half their max HP until you rest. So, just a unique twist which saves you from having to worry about always healing off the battle, and also a great help with that annoying experience that every JRPG player has had, where one party member gets killed just before the enemy dies, and then you have to waste an item or mana to revive them afterwards. Another feature that I really like is you can deliberately change turn order for your party. Normally, speed, or reflex as the series calls it, is the determining factor for who goes first. But you can deliberately change it so that certain characters go before others. This does obviously have the drawback that it may give enemies turns first, but it can be really helpful if a foster character has a status ailment or needs to be revived, so that you can cure them and still have them usable this turn. And lastly, there is the chest disarming. After battle, there is a chance that the enemy leaves behind a chest that has been trapped. You can then pick a party member to disarm it. If they succeed, you get bonus items. If they fail, the trap triggers, which can just be the chest exploding, it doing damage, or releasing a status effect. The chance of triggering depends on the character's luck, so keep an eye out for changes. But certain enemies tend to leave behind the same traps, so if you can make an educated guess, you can choose a character with a lot of HP or immunity to that status. So you can pick someone who would not be too affected if you do happen to trigger it. Before wrapping up, I want to talk about an aspect that is a bit of a mixed bag, and that's the variety. The boss fights are very varied. Most of them have a unique aspect to them, be they based around status effects, elements, or the way the enemy fights. Even characters who have recurring fights, there's quite a few of those, change up their strategies. For example, Maya, who has the ability to absorb the power of characters in books she reads, the game gets quite weird. And so you'll have to fight against her as a gunslinger, one where she's a mage, and another where she fights with martial arts. Or the early fights even, with Janus and his crew, where the first one, being the end of the prologue, is a very standard fight, but then the next time he heals his party, so you need to take him out first. But then in the next fight, his party blocks for him, so you have to fight him last. So that's good variety. But then there is the lack of variety in enemy types. Basically every location, be it dungeon or part of the overworld, has like 2, maybe 3 enemies to fight. And this is further compounded by the fact that sometimes the dungeon enemies are the same ones you would have just fought outside. I'm not expecting you to fight like 20 different enemies, especially since the dungeons aren't the longest, but just compared to Dragon Quest VIII, which came out around the same time. I remember how disappointed I was when I stepped into this room and the battle suddenly started with this intense music, and then it turns out it was just an ambush by the same old dipshits. But it's mostly a small irritation on what is a nice bunch of twists and variations to the core combat started in the first game. However, importantly, I don't think that it's particularly better than the previous installments, which is something good. Each Wild Arms game so far is keeping with the core combat system, but works into putting in a few alterations for each release. So I can go back to the previous and not feel like this one's combat is specifically lacking something important to make it a worse experience. So that's combat. That went on a lot longer than I expected, to be honest. But hang on to your britches, we're now getting to the area where the third installment really expands. What with this being on a new console, you would have expected that the first alteration here would be making the world bigger. I mean, since the HD era, that has been the most tedious discussion, with how big our world is being a deliberate selling point that I thought we were finally moving on from until this year happened and it unearthed its ugly visage once again. But I wouldn't say that the Wild Arms 3 map is noticeably larger than the second game, but where the great expansion comes from is how we are interacting with it. But before we get to the good stuff, let's talk about the more mixed bag element. The scanning system from the second game has returned, and it hasn't really been fixed. So, mostly the same criticisms as before. I do like that you are encouraged to explore. As someone who did grow up with the era of smearing your face over every object looking for hidden items, I don't mind slamming square to analyze every speck of the map. And the fact that you can find hidden items on the world is pretty cool. But the issue comes in with the fact that many of the locations in the game aren't actually findable until you've progressed far enough plot-wise. Which is just a bit of a kick in the teeth after you've traipsed an entire continent, only for them to say, come back later and do it again, dickweed. It just kind of encourages you not to do any exploration until much later in the game. Like, just beeline to each location, and hopefully when the world is more open, then you can find everything. I understand that you don't want every location to be accessible immediately, even if it is on an early game continent. But then at least rather have a more natural barrier, or just have it so that you can't really interact with anything there, instead of just, oh, you can't see me. It's just quite frustrating, since it is very much a game which encourages you to explore. I really like that. Wild Arms 3, ever more than before, doesn't tell you where to go, or the exact location of your next destination. You need to ask around the towns and speak to people to give you directions to the next place to go. And even then, you still need to explore, since they give a general direction of it rather than identify it for you or give you the exact coordinates. But herein lies the other problem. You really, really need to talk to people. There is no chance that you are just going to stumble upon the correct location from running around the world. The location is literally not going to appear unless someone tells you about it. I almost went completely mental at one point when I knew where the location was. The people in the town close to it were strongly hinting at it, but because I hadn't spoken to one specific guy 2 continents away, it wouldn't show up. The other mixed bag is a new feature, working off of an old one. In Wild Arms 2, we saw the introduction of the exclamation mark when an enemy encounter was about to happen, and then you could press circle to tell them to piss off. That has now been expanded upon with the encounter gauge. When an encounter pops up, you can press circle as before, but you can no longer do it to your heart's content. Depending on the strength of the enemy, cancelling the encounter will take a certain amount from your gauge, until you are no longer able to cancel anymore, and which then also increases the chance that you will be ambushed, or have one of your party members surrounded. You can increase the size of your ECN gauge by finding booster kits, and can also decrease the effects that encounters have on the gauge by increasing your migrant level by finding seals. Reaching a point where if your level is high enough, you can then cancel encounters at no cost. And I do like the idea of being able to skip encounters if you just want to get somewhere quickly, while also not being able to just ignore every single one. But there is a problem, obviously. When you introduce a new mechanic, you are generally going to make it quite an involved feature. And this is done here through making encounters being annoyingly frequent, leaving you tediously fighting or smacking circle. And it's specifically annoying when it interferes with puzzle solving. I had one where you had to very quickly bomb these beacons within a tight time limit. But then the encounter icon comes up, which doesn't allow you to push the tool button, so then some of the other beacons deactivated before I could finish. Which I suppose is as good a segue as any to talk about the first positive. The puzzles are the best they have ever been. A few of the tools are straight repeats of before, or are variations of the same tool, but they are now used in their most interesting ways. And there are also more puzzles which require you to use multiple tools together. Especially the throwing based tools no longer are just throwing in a straight line. Jet's boomerang, for example, has times where you must hit the wall and then fall onto a switch, which did happen once or twice in the previous game to be fair, but it's a bit more frequent. But then there are also times when you need to move the boomerang in mid-air to curve it around somewhere. Or Virginia's Flame Crest, which does move in a straight line, but then requires you to position yourself correctly so you don't hit certain areas. But it's not just the tools. There are a lot more puzzles that don't require tools, and a good variety of them. There's box throwing puzzles, Simon Says memory puzzles, time-based puzzles, mirror puzzles, puzzles with riddles, following the pattern puzzles, etc. etc. I also like the more environment-based puzzles, which need you to pay attention to your surroundings. Like there's this one where you stand on the switch, but nothing happens. And then, if you analyze it with X, it tells you that the button is stuck, which leads you to notice that there's a ledge just above it you can drop off of, which will then trigger the switch. There are also occasions where you need to turn a valve, which is obviously nothing of too much note, but I do just genuinely like the feeling that there is more interaction with the world in this one. On that note, there is also new ways of traversing the dungeons, as there are situations where you need to use monkey bars to get around, which you can also climb up on and then walk along, coupled with a tool that allows you to jump. And then there are also occasions where you need to creep to avoid falling through weakened floorboards. A feature which was introduced in the prologue, but then took so long to actually come back that I forgot about it. I could not understand why I kept falling off here for like 2 minutes. So, your time in the dungeons is all good and fun, but what about getting there? Traversal is now greatly improved as well, merely by the fact that there are now more means of doing it. Starting off with you needing to take the train to reach far off parts of the map until you can get access to the other ones more closely associated with the theming. Yes, it took 6 years, but the Wild West game finally has horses. They help you cover the map at a good pace and can also jump over crevasses to reach other parts of the map when it feels like triggering, and they also give combat a different vibe. If you are attacked while riding a horse, your party will still be riding the horses in combat. It doesn't make too much of a difference, apart from your party having higher evasion, but it's just another thing which gives you a different feeling while playing. I also like that depending on which party member is selected, the sprite for the horse will change to the one that belongs to them. This is also now the first one without a boat, purely because there's no water in the game. As part of the change up to the world in this one, which we will get to later, the oceans have completely dried up and are just now sand dunes. And as a result, instead of a ship, you will now traverse these parts with a sandcraft. The control is basically the same, but again, just a nice change up to make the game feel a bit more unique from the previous installments. That being said, there is one thing different, and that it comes now with new combat. When you attack in the Sandcraft, you enter a more ATB style of combat, where foster characters can have multiple attacks before others, and each party member gets assigned a role. One is the pilot, who can move the craft to more advantageous positions, the gunner to fire, obviously, the harpoonist, who can fire their harpoon to grab enemies to make critical hits more likely, and then the helmsman, who can be used to enhance the other party members. You can change their position on the fly, and so move faster party members to the needed position. And you can also upgrade the craft for better offensive capabilities, to the point where honestly, any strategy gets removed. Lastly, the Lombardia is back. It's the airship again. You can now fire missiles to clear obstacles, but it's mostly the same. That being said, like the Sandcraft, it also has its own combat moments, though they're not very frequent unless you're doing a specific side quest, and then it's also mostly just fire, fire, fire. The key word here is variety. In contrast to the enemies, the exploration, puzzles, and traversal give a great deal of diversity as you explore through this version of Filgaia, providing enough feeling of difference as you progress to stop it from getting stale. Also helped by the fact that the dungeons aren't that long. And in keeping with variety, there are also the Millennium puzzles. They can pop up via scanning, and when you complete them, you get a reward. They require you to push boxes so that those of the same color will match up and be cleared off the board. And they're just some fun little brain teasers. They give you a bit of a time off and a bit of a rest from the game. Except when you want to press X to grab the box, but then you aren't aligned properly, and then you run off the board, meaning you have to start over. Anyway, let's just finish off by talking about the Gimel coins, as they are now more useful. In previous games, if the party is wiped, they could be used to start the battle over as a continue rather than gaming over. They still have that use now, but they are also used for saving the game outside of towns, as there is now no longer any save points inside dungeons or on the world map. And you don't really have to worry about them running out. Each dungeon will give you one at roughly the halfway point, so where a save point would normally be, and a lot of enemies drop them as well. But that's gameplay now checked off. Let's check the other criteria. Just a quick look here. I really like how each Wild Arms game has had a unique style that sets each installment as distinct from the other, while still all feeling like they're part of the same series. And Wild Arms 3 is continuing that, with the characters and sprites being done in a sketchbook style. There isn't really too much to say about it. It just looks really good, and it blends very well with the more realistic environments. And it also does a good job of countering an issue I spoke about in my Final Fantasy V video, how the move into the 3D era and away from pixel sprites limited some of the expressivity that you could display in your characters, particularly early on when a lot of 3D faces were very sterile and limited in the motions that would be needed for displaying an array of emotions. But I think this style does a pretty good job of capturing that pixel era vibe. There is a decent range of emotions that get displayed here, and when they are unable to capture it via animation, they add portraits to the text to help you visualize it. And some of these are really funny and endearing. And on the note of animation, I also think it's pretty good and fluid. Good effort is made to make the characters emote and make gestures to allow conversations to feel more dynamic, particularly since we are relying on those in-game cutscenes to do all of the narrative. I will admit, that a lack of voice acting or CGI cutscenes does detract a bit from the more intense plot moments, but overall, it's a very good job. This is also my favourite opening prologue for the series, particularly with how you pick which character you're going to start with. And this attempt at fluidity and dynamism extends into the combat as well. I didn't talk about it in the combat section since it's all aesthetic, I think. Firstly, this isn't new, but I really like how this series makes critical hits feel so impactful. The close-up on the person firing before zooming into the enemy being hit and a large crack with the shot is really satisfying. And this is amplified further in 3 with the fact that characters all now react quite exaggeratedly to even general attacks. Honestly, it is a bit to an overly dramatic degree. Alongside that, there is also a notable improvement into other combat effects. One of my more minor criticisms of the first game was that the magic, and particularly the summons, didn't come across as very impactful in terms of how the attack actually looked. The second game improved it, but it was still lacking in comparison to your more notable series. But now we have reached the level. Spells and summons now actually look like they're doing something powerful enough to match the damage they are doling out. Onto the change, which I think is just aesthetic. Maybe someone else can confirm. Combat participants now move around in battle. I can't see any material impact it has on combat, and I can't find any claim that it does. I have noticed that when attacked from the front, your party members are more likely to dodge, but that could just be coincidence. Either way, you have no real control over it anyway. It's not like you can target an enemy who's in a more vulnerable position, since firstly, when you select an enemy, it zooms in on them, so it makes it very hard to determine where they actually are in relation to your party, especially when it's the same type of enemy, which, as we've established, can be quite common in this game. And secondly, they move immediately after you select them. It's not like Final Fantasy XIII, where the movement can actually be used to determine who to attack next based on proximity and the enemy's status. There, I said something positive about Final Fantasy XIII. But either way, it does succeed in creating a feeling of emotion to the battles. By then, the UI is also a lot cleaner and blends nicer into this style. So, we are checking off all the boxes so far, but those who have seen my video on the second game know I was also very approving of all the aspects mentioned so far in that one. So let's see if Wild Arms 3 can pass where the second one failed. Absolutely no problems here. I really like the characters this time. Something that I honestly didn't think would be the case at the start, but they quickly grew on me. I will admit that the antagonists are maybe a little bit bland and one note, but some of them do interact well with the party, and anyway, the party itself more than makes up for it. As well as some recurring characters that pop up to brighten things up. So, of course, time for the obligatory disclaimer. I'm obviously going to be getting into spoilers from this point on, so if you wish to play the game without any of the narrative being revealed, it's time to tap out. Anyway, we'll start talking about the protagonists. Firstly, we have Virginia, who is generally presented as the major protagonist, with her being the party leader, and having the majority of the interactions with the antagonists. But I don't think it would be fair to simply throw off the other three as merely support characters. More on them later. For now, let's talk about Virginia. She is so endearingly naive. Her backstory is that she's from a pretty privileged background, while also having a rather traumatic past. She was spoiled by her father when young, but he disappeared one day, and her mother soon died as well, leaving her needing to be brought up by her aunt and uncle, who were consequently overprotective of her. She then leaves to become a drifter to chart her own path. And this creates an interesting arc, as she is left to actually determine what is it that she wants from being a drifter. Is she looking to help anyone she can? Is she looking to bring a sense of justice to the wasteland? Is she actually just looking to find her father? Or is it to give herself a general sense of purpose? And on that note, her relationship with her father is convincingly done. We discover that he is still about and heavily involved in the incidents which are responsible for the narrative that is taking place. More on that later. And as a result, he crops up relatively frequently. And Virginia's feelings towards him are complicated. Naturally, she is happy to see her father, who has been gone for so long, but she also harbors an anger and perhaps a bit of a hatred towards him for abandoning her. It's a pretty well done conflict. And all of it is topped off by just her general character. As I said, she is so naive. And that is true for the start of the game, but the events that take place model it into someone with a strong sense of justice, while also still maintaining their sweet innocence and positivity. That being said, she's also still capable of giving a snide and incisive jab when she feels like being a bit passive-aggressive. She's just a great character. On to Clive, an interesting specimen for this genre, for the reason we will soon get onto. As a drifter, he does freelance work as a bounty hunter and general problem cleaner-upper. However, we discover that he used to actually be an archaeologist doing a lot of research into the events that ruined Fulgaia. But upon the death of his professor, he leaves the profession formally for his drifter lifestyle, though still yearns to complete his and his professor's work. And this ties into his character being more reserved, logical, and calculated, generally being the voice of reason and analytical one in any given situation. But he can also be absolutely scathing when he wants to be. And like I said earlier, he has an interesting aspect for this genre, in that he has a functional, healthy family life. He has a wife and daughter who he speaks to quite regularly and has a close relationship with. But even though it is a healthy one, there is also the aspect of it that the professor who died was also his father-in-law, and he feels responsible for that, which does create a schism and a bit of uncertainty in their marriage. And added onto that, the closeness is also a bit of a burden, because him being so close to his family and wanting to see them does actually contrast with his job, which requires him to leave home for extended periods of time. On to Jet, the treasure hunter. As the job title indicates, he roams around the wasteland in an attempt to find treasure so he can get more money. That is his core motivation, as he lacks any concern for people in any kind of empathetic way. He has no memory of his past, and so feels like he has no links to the world. Therefore, material earnings are his only consideration. So naturally, he's very sullen and whines about doing anything if it doesn't seem like it'll be worth it. Something that would get very grating if that was all there is to it. But it does create some good interplay with the rest of the party, particularly Virginia, who either gives some nice and funny, exasperated quips, or fights against his stern negativity with her overbearing positivity. There is obviously more to it than would appear at first glance, but we'll get onto that a bit more later. For now, let's move on to our last party member, Gallows. This is the character that I particularly felt I wasn't going to enjoy, but he actually developed well. He is a member of the Beskar tribe, who, for those who don't know, are basically like the Cetra from Final Fantasy VII. In each game, they are the tribe with the strongest connection to the Guardians, being the ones who communicate with them and are most attuned to the state of Felgaia. And not only is he a member of the tribe, but he is in fact the grandson of the head honcho, and so naturally is being trained as a priest. This is something that he doesn't want to do, and so he is extremely lazy and attempts to avoid all his responsibilities. So he starts out as quite an obnoxious brat. But importantly, he does have growth. As we continue in the narrative and see the dangerous state that Felgaia is in, he comes to realize the importance of his position. However, it's not just complete acceptance of, oh, this is what I have to do now, but rather it actually creates an interesting conflict. A dynamic where he understands the importance of his role, but doesn't just become an ardent servant to it, creating this contrast where he is still hostile to the role as he feels trapped, his desire for freedom and to chart his own course, working against this assigned duty. So that arc is good, but even if we just take a look at him being a slacker and shirker, that part in itself is actually pretty well done, as the game doesn't venerate him for it. He gets pretty routinely mocked for his incompetence, with there even being a whole dungeon about him just pathetically going after a woman. And on that note, this is something that I enjoy even more than the individual characters in and of themselves. I really like how the party interact with each other. There is great chemistry, as what you could argue are relatively standard character tropes work well with each other. Virginia's exuberant positivity versus Jet's sullen and cynical nature. Everyone in the party's general exhaustion with Gallows. The way that the whole party just gives in to Virginia as they lack the energy to keep arguing with her. There are many conversations within the party that got a good chuckle out of me. But it's not just those humorous parts. One of my complaints from Wild Arms 2 when it came to characterization was that they would often do the "we can do this together" thing, but then didn't actually show the working of them becoming this tight-knit unit. That is not the case here. Starting from people who just happen to meet each other because of happening to be on the same train, and then just making a delivery together, we actually get to see a party getting to know each other and become closer and closer as they support each other. However, for me, one of the best dynamics doesn't actually come from within the party. Rather, it is between Virginia and a recurring intruder. But before we talk about the interactions, Maya is just a great character in her own right. Similar to Jane in the first game, her motivation is just going around to make as much money as possible, or in her case, finding gems. But unlike Jane, who always showed herself in public to be cool and collected, Maya has no issue with throwing a tantrum when things aren't going her way. But when things are going her way, she shows a fun irreverence and laissez-faire attitude, even when dealing with the major antagonists in the game. And it is this part of her character that creates the interplay with Virginia. It starts off as just a plain rivalry that she honestly plays to a T, because in the first dungeon, when she kept screwing you over, I was going to lose it. But as we progress, we see that there is more to it. Maya's cynicism contrasting with Virginia's overt idealism. And there actually being a kind of protective urge, as she knows that to survive as a drifter, you need to be more hardened and less gullible. But at the same time, Virginia's perseverance and dedication to search for justice also highlights the negatives of Maya's apathy, and so she is able to sway her to be willing to help. There is a great moment where Maya finally pushes Virginia over the edge, and in a moment of anger, she attempts to slap her, only for Maya to block it. A triumphant indication of her impotence to those more jaded and hardened by their time on the wasteland. But Virginia doesn't concede and manages to catch Maya off guard and playfully finishes the slap. Just a kind of sweet reinforcement that while Virginia herself has become more inured and world-weary, she is also going to keep to her principles and show that you can still overcome by maintaining an innocent belief in the good of people. It's a great relationship, and it serves to enhance a similar one Virginia has with Janice, which would have been a lot less interesting if it wasn't for Maya. Janice also challenges Virginia's naive view of being a drifter, telling her to harden and become more self-centered. But the key difference is that he is purely driven by ego and self-enrichment, to the point that it is responsible for his downfall. So, if he was the only one forcing her to come to this realization, it could have easily been discarded. But coming from Maya, who has shown to have some conscience and ability to hear reason, and also later the discovery from her own entourage that she's actually a very thoughtful and caring person, it makes the development more substantive. So, great characters with good interactions. A marked improvement from the previous installment. But that isn't the only area where I am much more pleased with the third game's effort. I mentioned in my Wild Arms 2 video that while I wasn't massively gripped by its narrative, I did like how it opened up Fulgaia to more. That rather than just being a world for the immediate plot of the first game, it had created its own lore to set up a series of stories. And Wild Arms 3 takes that and runs with it. By now, we've got used to a similar setup to the state of Fulgaia. Our backdrop has been, many years ago there was a war that took place between humans and demons, and that war did irreparable damage to the world, which is now in this desolate and ruined state. As a result, society comes up with two general responses. In Wild Arms 1, the weapons or arms used in the war have been completely banned, and anyone who uses them is ostracized from society, which leads to the kind of ironic result that they then need to be used to repel the demon threat that comes back, thinking the world is ripe for taking. In Wild Arms 2, we see the development of different kingdoms that forge alliances and mediate as needed in response to threats. The other response, which is common to all three games, is the creation of drifters or wanderers. People who travel the wasteland looking for work and fulfillment in a world that offers limited opportunities. Wild Arms 3 starts with a similar setting, but we already see some changes early on. The other similar feature in every game is the prologue. You are given the choice of which character to play with in a short dungeon where they introduce what will be their initial motivation and core gameplay mechanics. And once you have finished for each character, you will see how they end up together and what the ultimate goal will be for at least the first act of the game. And 3 does keep to that, but with a slight adjustment. In the previous two games, once the party has formed, they have a concrete goal that they're heading for. In the first game, get Cecilia, the chosen one, to where she needs to be to handle the impending demon threat. And in the second game, it is joining the Super Friends Alliance to go about dealing with threats. But in number 3, it's a bit more ethereal. I mean, the party meets at cross purposes already. Gallows and Jet are trying to steal the crystal rose that is on the train, while Clive is there because he's been hired to protect it. And Virginia just happens to be on the train by chance. From there, they just agree to help finish the rose's delivery, where they are then told that there's a threat coming, go get some mediums and be prepared for it. So while there is some vague idea, we aren't given a straight up directive and place to go to. A lot of the early game is the party just guessing where to go, and even sometimes just doing a job because they need some money, which works well with the game design requiring you to explore and ask for directions. And by following these clues and hunches, you come across the immediate threat of the Prophets, a group whose goal is to evolve Fulgaia, which unfortunately for the people living on it requires them to be mulched. And now we have an actual goal which is going to be the core of the narrative for a good deal of the game. But along the way, we are going to see some interesting developments. Firstly, an interesting change that it isn't actually the demons responsible for the state of Fulgaia. Well, not exactly responsible. The planet was damaged from the war, but it wasn't so severe. But humans undertook a project to fully revitalize it, and it is this project that created the desolation that we see in the game. Which is a nice little change to established lore. We are pretty accustomed to the demons being the universal bad in the series. Like, in the first game, they do definitely have interesting dynamics and interplay amongst them, and the humans did also use the arms that destroyed the planet. But they were predominantly used to their worst extent to fight the war against the invading demons. So the demons were still incontrovertibly the big bad responsible for the core of the problem. But now we get this consideration that perhaps humans should also be held accountable, that their obsession with the memory, keep that in mind, of what Fulgaia was, led to a creation of a worse version of what it now is. And this becomes a point in even sharper focus on hitting onto another revelation. Humans, or Neo-Sapiens as the game calls them, aren't native to Fulgaia. They came to it from another planet some time ago, so they are actually an invasive force which has come to dictate the planet to their own desires. And invasive is the correct word, as highlighted by another discovery, which is the relationship with the eels. Not really mentioned in the second game, well, I can't remember it to be honest. The eels were a key part of the first game's plot. Also living on Fulgaia before the war, they leave the ruined planet following its destruction, with you needing to go to their new home to find their legendary blacksmith and get his help for treating one of the main characters. In the third game, the relationship is not nearly as cooperative, and it already wasn't great in the first place. When going to the world's footprint and seeing the historical record of Fulgaia, we note that after arriving, the Neo-Sapiens actually went to war with the eels. So they were genuinely an invasive force, seeking to claim the planet for themselves. And while they did come to a truce, it created the initial frictions and damage which would compound to the planet's demise. We also get a look into where the arms actually come from. In the past, Fulgaia was inhabited by dragons, who naturally, when dying, left behind pretty large skeletons, and these bones and tissue are what the arms are made from, tying into the theory and later confirmation that the world of Fulgaia is itself a living organism, all of which forms around the major narrative point and theme for chapters 2 and 3. The conflict between those who carry the guilt and memories of the damage done, and the need to atone for it by preserving it and possibly revitalizing it, versus the prophets who see it as nothing more than a tool to be used for evolution. A goal which will invariably lead them to seeking the power of the demons, which allows us into another interesting view of the demons. Again, them being naturally powerful was a feature of the first two games, but it was more just done with the goal of making them formidable enemies. Now we have the consideration of why people might side with them or turn to them for assistance. These beings who of course exist to merely travel between planets and absorb their energy. It's the power that they can provide you if you are willing to submit to them and disfigure yourself for them, similar to the Lucavi in Final Fantasy Tactics. And then we hit the final reveal to top it all off, as Siegfried, the demon the prophets summon, informs us that Neo-Sapiens are actually descendants of demons, creating this poignant question: is there actually a reason for them to be fighting here? Like, is all their fighting and destruction not a natural part of them? And so, we can have this discussion of whether existence is something determined by uncontrollable phenomena like birth and instinct, or do we determine who we are and chart our own meanings and motivations? Highlighted by Jet, discovering the reason that he has no memories of the past is because he has no real past. He is an android created via a sample of Fulgaia. As a result, he begins to see himself as a hollow automaton with no real reason for existing, and so will need to come to the realization that he is determined by what he does, what he experiences, and those around him. So, what have we seen here? A great use of lore and tropes that have genuinely been established in the first two games. And so as a player of those previous two, you kind of do have some assumptions of how these themes and plot points are going to manifest themselves. But the third game has taken these established factors and twisted them to give a new and unique experience, which is just so good to see. I mean, Final Fantasy waited until the Fabulous series before examining the idea that maybe these crystals aren't always the best things. That's twice now I said something good about Final Fantasy 13. But what isn't subverted is that we give the demon a good what for and save the day. Wait. End of chapter 3?
There's still more!
In the build-up to giving Siegfried a good twatting, we get to see a conversation between him and the prophet leader. In this conversation, he mentions the existence of dream demons, ethereal beings that exist within the mind and travel via the electric signals that make up the conscience. And such a conversation doesn't just happen for flavor text, does it? So, chapter 4 starts with the team having a cracking party, celebrating their success, and being thrilled with the absolute fire dance moves of the Beskars. However, festivities get ruined after Gallows' brother, Shane, runs off seeking to ignite the Surge of Gaia, which will release a great burst of energy that will likely destroy the planet. And the reason he does so is because of the dream demon Beatrice, who has been traveling through people's minds and planting suggestions, which has basically been causing all these problems, as she seeks to absorb the planet's energy to create her own world where she can exist as an actual material being. And this is where everything coalesces into the grand theme of memories and experiences. Beatrice has the ability to infect people's dreams and basically cause them to hallucinate thoughts and so manipulate them into carrying out actions. We see this in the discovery that she manipulated the researcher who ended up being responsible for the damage done to Fulgaia. And it's through these manipulations that we get to examine the core theme, as her influence isn't always just a creation of straight up false thoughts. It can also be the exploitation of insecurities present within her victims, as illustrated by the aforementioned Shane. He is the current pillar, who, like Tim in Wild Arms 2, is the priest dedicated to communing with the planet on behalf of the village. However, as a result, he is dedicated to the village and is not able to travel, save for heading to a few shrines occasionally. And as a result, he is frustrated and jealous of his brother, being able to travel and create memories and experiences. Beatrice is able to exploit this and get him to attempt to create the surge that she desires, which leads to a great scene where, upon being pulled out of his trance, Shane attempts to atone by sacrificing himself, declaring himself happy to have the memories that he gained via learning of the planet's history and the story he has heard from the party. To which Gallus responds by saying, "Don't be a nonce. Those aren't your memories. Those aren't your experiences. You don't get to know the world through others. You need to go out and live it yourself." It's pretty impactful, especially when the power of the bond they share is able to overcome the energy surging through them. And it's also hitting onto a thought present throughout the people of Fulgaia. Oh no, the planet is in severe danger. We best act quickly. Virginia's dad mentions in Chapter 3 that the destruction of the planet is actually a recent phenomenon, only having happened 10 years prior. However, despite this, nobody can actually remember the event, of course due to Beatrice interfering with their memories. Nor do they remember what this old Fulgaia that they romanticize looks like. So they live with this distorted idea of it, alluding to the other aspect of our core theme. While the game does talk about the importance of memories and the positives of creating them, it does investigate the opposite as well. This idea that not all memories should be clung on to. They can in fact be dangerous and prevent the creation of a positive future, particularly examined through Clive's Chapter 4 arc. As Beatrice rampages about, the decision is made that the party must destroy Hyades, which is the library housing all the information that the demons had stored during their time on the planet. This is something that Clive is opposed to, as he still clings to his desire of rejuvenating Fulgaia. And this resultant reluctance actually provides Beatrice with the opportunity to interrupt them. His conflict over the matter leads him to abandon the party, as he cannot reconcile his desire to preserve this archive while helping his party to handle the imminent threat. It requires a moment with his daughter for him to realize that what is actually important is what is actually substantively here and now. These are the things that will chart the future. So, are memories something to be abandoned or something to fiercely cling to? Well, we can look to Virginia's Chapter 4 situation for some more enlightenment. After Clive comes to terms with the need to destroy Hyades, the party are informed that Beatrice has captured and seemingly done harm towards her father. However, upon arriving to rescue him, they come to discover that he in fact is not actually Virginia's father, as in, he isn't him in a material sense. Rather, he is a kind of hologram or spectre created through the memories of him that have been stored. And so, if she is to see her task through to the end, she will have to eradicate him fully from existence. And that is where we get our answer. It's not just about holding on to these memories religiously, nor do we just discard those we find inconvenient. Instead, we take them, good and bad, and reconcile them into a unified whole that will allow us to chart a path for the future. Something solidified by our ending. As a bit of an ending twist, Beatrice actually wins. Despite being defeated, she is able to eradicate Fulgaia. Following her battle, we are left in a blank void. And the only thing they can do is recreate the destroyed world from memories. Not the memories that have been rumored and mythologized, but the Fulgaia that the people living on it have experienced. Another subversion of the previous games, as this time we don't see a restoration of the old world. Instead, while the threat may be gone, they will need to build again from this imperfect and damaged world, rather than getting a nice pristine new state. And continuing on that note, we also don't see the happiest of endings for our protagonists, at least not in the conventional sense. Not only does no one even know about this danger that they've just defeated, but in fact, they are actually believed to be responsible for the death of the leader of the religion that many people in Fulgaia ascribed to as a source of hope for its rejuvenation, and so they actually become fugitives. I have to say, I really do love this ending. The party is pinned down under fire, following the body's discovery, and naturally they go into combat mode, ready for yet another fight. However, this time it's enough. The fighting is done, and they don't have the energy to keep this going. Virginia is no longer going to keep arguing and attempt to justify herself. Whatever comes, will come. She has found the group which has helped her to define herself, who she is, and stabilize what she believes. Likewise, under her honestly erratic and often flawed leadership, the rest of the party have been able to do the same. And if you've been paying attention, you will see that's the important thing here. In a world where the origins and the general myth of what it represents are something passed down through tales and rumors, it is only through actual material experience that you can come to some understanding of your true identity and your interpretation of it. And that's Wild Arms 3. Grand, vast, convoluted, bonkers, profound, and honestly quite silly as well. There are some truly funny moments here that break up some of the plot points and allow us to refocus on our characters that great work has been done in making enduring. And aside from the characters, the humor also grounds it. With how strange and weird this plot gets at times, the fact that it isn't always taking itself so seriously helps you ride through some of the more outlandish stuff and still come away with a positive experience. And that's what we want more than anything out of this, right? A positive experience. Something this game provides in spades. I started this video talking about the increasing failure of new generations to truly expand upon their predecessors. More because years of writing essays at school and university has kind of trained us as a people that your intros need to be somewhat more profound and have something to say rather than just, this is the thing I want to talk about today. But as I continued with writing the script and just generally thought more about the game I had experienced, as well as finishing off the platinum given how much I loved it, which means yes, I pushed through that absolute slog of a dungeon. Anyway, while I was doing all of this, I found the comparison more apt. Yes, leaps in console generations are less monumental than they used to be. But ultimately, a lot of that can be chalked down to the fact that technology is providing diminishing returns in all areas of society. But playing through a game released at a time of arguably the perfect intersection between gaming budgets and uncharted frontiers, I can't help but see another aspect missing. Passion. More particularly, unrestrained passion. I do firmly believe that a lot of projects that are released today are still also being created by those with passion, but nowadays there is a far larger barrier for that to break through, sanding it down to remove any potential risky quirkiness and ensuring it's homogenized enough to ensure it won't offend too many possible customers. In comparison, playing Wild Arms 3, there's just so many little touches which made it feel unique and something that the people truly wanted to make, rather than merely an obligation to sell product. And I'm sure this will immediately prompt the response of stop bothering with AAA and go to indies. But that shouldn't be the case. You should be demanding more from the AAA industry rather than just casting it aside. They have the money, the reach, the influence to find the best talent and the technology to do the most unique and innovative things in the industry. And I think a Wild Arms video is an apt time to point this out, since Sony used to be one of the prime examples of this. They used to do it to a T. Wild Arms, obviously, Ape Escape, Ico, Kurachi, Parappa the Rapper, Dark Cloud, Patapon, Loco Roco. So many different and unique experiences that were created under their auspices, as opposed to the games now being released, which all feature a very similar feel to them as we enter the era of the dominance of cinematic games. And I'm not even saying these are all terrible games by any stretch. I have enjoyed quite a few of them, and also think they get a bad rap from people who don't actually play them and just believe grifting YouTubers who accuse the games of having no gameplay and just being too woke. For example, I don't even like The Last of Us 2, but I would definitely say it's delusional to say it has no gameplay. But there is definitely the issue that they all feel too similar and aren't doing anything new or innovative, creating a very monotonous feeling every time you play a new AAA game. And honestly, I don't even know if it will get any better, especially since if the tediously painful mudslinging you could see a few months ago on Twitter between old and new Resident Evil fans is anything to go by, we now have an audience trained to be happy with this homogenization. And as well as more recent incidents that have happened. But that's going on to something else. I have thought of doing a video about something that's been bothering me for a while. If you would like to see me generally talk more about a trend in the industry rather than just a specific game, let me know, I suppose. But for now, the best thing I can think to do in this situation is make like the people of Fulgar and grab onto those memories and experiences that we have while we still can.